GM.
GM. How goes it?
Good. How's your morning?
It's going well. It's going well. Recovering a bit from yesterday. As a terminally online individual, I hadn't
Oh,
been
the
outside
sun.
much. Yeah. In the last couple of days, I've been uh, touching grass, laying by the
Same dude. I had
pool.
two fantasy football drafts in 2 days. Dude, I'm fantasied out. But
Are you
we did our draft yesterday outside. It was
are you
nice.
big into fantasy? Do you play like online leagues, or are you playing with people who are like around you in real life?
Real humans. Can you believe it?
Ooh.
I know. I know.
I I was just telling him, like, my brother-in-law yesterday, or my sister-in-law and brother-in-law yesterday, that, like, on what day was it? On 2 days ago, the day before Memorial Day, I was sitting there with like a larger group of people, and one of the like wives of the guys there was talking about stuff. And while I was listening to her talk, I was just thinking to myself, like, it's really hard to relate sometimes to, what people that aren't I don't know if it's just our industry. Maybe it's like finance in general or tech and finance in general.
No, it's our industry.
Is it?
It's crypto. We're like the crypto or the crypto guy.
I just feel like the topics of discussion are even more meaningless than like our meaningless quote unquote, magical internet money. So like I listen to these things and like the type of complaints that like they may have, and it's just like, why does that matter? So I think I need to get out more.
No, I mean, look, if you think of like, so in terms, this is the way I think about it, just like as a third party observer at a lot of these like fantasy things, is I don't take fantasy seriously. A lot of these guys take fantasy seriously. I hit the playoffs every year, but I also have business intelligence, like, data analytics background, right? So like I watched one NFL game last year and I still hit the playoffs in both my leagues.
Nice.
Um, but like, it's like a numbers game, right? It's just like it's making quick decisions, right, based on different numbers that you have available to you. And so like that's a translatable skill that I think is probably was developed both in finance and in crypto. But when you just like look at them from like a third party and what they're discussing, it's like, and I said this yesterday too, is just like constant betting like on games in which that they don't like the teams. They don't, they don't have any allegiance. They don't follow the teams. It's just like, what game is playing tonight? Okay, what's the line? All right, I'll bet on this. And so it's like it's similar to like what we do with a lot of things,
Yeah, I
only
agree with
much
that
smaller
about
size. We
I
we do it in much larger size.
I definitely agree with that on fantasy type games because yeah, it is a numbers game. You're if you go in having done if you go in having done no analysis on any of the players and you're just picking people who are big names, you're gonna get wrecked.
But yeah, like these guys, like they'll. I mean, I don't know. It's fun because it's like a normie thing to do with normie friends.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of people in the crypto space, but um, yeah, I just see it's like there's a like for like in terms of like what the hobby is. Ours is profit maximization, and they live normie lives and do normie things and have normie interests.
It's strange because like everyone lives to some extent for profit maximization. It's that like the avenues of sourcing that um it's like we've been able to see more pathways to get to there, or are willing to open up our risk tolerance to find them.
Yeah, we're all like so. Um, when you work on at like a large traditional bank or large finance company, and you're moving like massive quantities of money around, um, it's just like numbers, right? So like you're completely um, Like you have no emotion, right? It's just like, okay, I push this button, I just moved like $4 billion, right? Like it's so but it's not your money, right? So you don't have that like
Yeah.
emotional connection. And then you come to crypto and you start small and you start moving money around, and then everyone has like one massive loss or two massive losses, and like even if it was all unrealized gains, right? You like started at 10,000, it went up to 500,000, it went back to 10,000. Like you have this perceived loss of like I lost 500 grand. And so you really feel those emotion elements. But then as the more that kind of happens, you also become immune to that, like a lot of that emotional side of trading, I think. And like, especially if you've been around for a few cycles, uh, yeah, I would say that, yeah, everyone has profit maximization in it, but like we do it at a scale which is like unparalleled to other people, because like once you get through a few cycles, it's like it's not emotional games. Like, so some of these guys, like they talk about like, oh, I put 250 on that trade, and like I'm back in the last bull run, we're paying that in gas just to execute, just to place a bet. Um,
Yeah, that's become one of the
you can't
harder
relate to
things
people
for
with that
me.
though. You
That's
can't relate to
become
any of your friends with that.
it's become one of the like hardest things for me when gambling in real life on things, or not like sports betting or going to the casino, but like with friends in a game, or making a wager, that I'm used to doing that with my internet friends, where it'll be, I bet you 5 ETH, that this or that happens, and nobody cares because to them those are just their game tokens, their casino chips.
Mhm.
But in real life, people are like, I bet you $20, bet you $50 this happens, and I'm like, keep the money, man. It's not worth it. let's just let's just laugh if one of us wins.
Yeah. My well, this is a trip a while ago, but hey, we all went to Vegas, and like, yeah, my bet placing is like a lot larger, and it's not like at that time I did not have more money than them per se. You have a lot less emotion, so it's like this makes a lot. They haven't been through those like large losses or large gains, um, and so like even a small gain like hits them in the gut. And they're like, I could have bought a McDonald's lunch with that or whatever. Like, but yeah, I agree with you. Like if it's not worth, it's like then also when they start asking you to like invest their money, and you're like, my risk tolerance is completely different to yours. So if you give me like $1,000 and you only have $10,000 in the bank and I lose it, I'm like, I'm placing $1,000. I'm placing 20,000, $1,000 bets on things that I'm okay with all of them going to zero. Um, but
Yeah, I
like
had that happen
that's a
last
large part of
season.
their net worth, and so it's like it's not worth me taking a small amount of money from you because my risk tolerance is completely asymmetrical to yours.
I don't normally give any, you know, tips,
Yeah, I know.
hints, anything to like any people that I know outside of crypto. Even in crypto, like you don't see me on my Twitter like shilling tokens for people to buy. If I'm like quote unquote shilling something, it's usually me making memes about it, or like, I don't know, an anata. But I had a friend that I gave some info that I felt was good info at the time. He followed me into a trade, did really, really well. And I remember when he wanted to pull out, and I was like, you got another, 1x essentially on this. Like, um, and, I mean, another 2x on this essentially. Like, I think you should hold it. We're almost there. And he's like, nah, nah, nah. Like, I don't care. Like, this is enough for me. And he wanted to get out. And to be honest, it made me relook at the chart because he
Hmm.
was someone who was like uber bullish all the time. That kind of new entrant to crypto where like all the numbers going up is just like pure euphoria for them. So they can't think of anything else. But for some reason, he was like, no, it's up enough for me. I want to cash everything up. So I went back and looked, and I didn't sell. I ended up selling 2 days later. But he was right. He literally like marked the top, and sold the top, and then I took like a 10% haircut from the top. So wasn't that bad, but it just made me think. Like sometimes that like normie intuition we lack. Um, because we will compare, like we'll compare a token and its chart to like something else um, that doesn't really matter, right? Like it's not a base pair people are trading against. We're just like, oh well, this one is fits the same type of attention that the other one has gotten, and it's a mass similar TVL, so its chart should play out similar. And it's a terrible like habit to form that just because something did it, like this one will last just as long or go just as high. Um, that's usually the crowded trade. There's usually a lot of people thinking that.
Fair enough. But also, they also can be good counter indicators as well.
Yeah, usually he's a good counter indicator. Like
Yeah,
for
usually,
his
yeah.
his Doge calls were I had to like beg him to not buy them, and luckily he didn't.
Yeah, I hate it when people find out that you work in like blockchain or whatever, and then like your barber starts talking to you about like stuff that he's been seeing on TikTok and whatnot. Like, I'm like, I try to stir the conversation away from that. I'm not going to even try to relate to you on that level of if you're putting money in Doge, and I'm like, when your barber's telling you that Doge is going to go to $1, you're like, all right.
I curb it real quick by just telling him like, yeah, I don't pay attention to coins like that. Like I
Yeah.
just trade.
Well, though
They're just
Yeah,
easy.
I'll curve it. Like I don't pay attention to price. Like even though we all take that's like the only thing. Now I completely curve it to yeah. Yeah. I'm just one of the software devs. I'm not a trader.
Yeah, I just I do BD. I work in finance in business development for finance.
One thing that recently, especially the last like 2 months, because my friends try to relate, and so like they'll talk about crypto, or they mostly will like try to like dunk and be like, not doing that well, and I'm like, dude, it's especially when like Bitcoin's at 30 grand. I'm like, it's like still the best performing asset this year. Like what? I'm like what? Because you're not following it. Like
He's
it was
like,
up like
no, I just
80%. Like
just
what are you
thought I'd
talking
be
about?
doing better, like it was like 60 grand one time, should be a lot better than now. That's all I'm
Yeah, it's just
saying.
like there's so like I don't know.
Up only.
It's still then you remember like okay, well it's still less than 1% of the global population. It's us. Uh oh.
But I don't know, man. All these stats we've been looking at every day look pretty bullish on the adoption side. Like we don't see it. That's one thing I think we're pretty blind to in the when you're like in the trenches, when you're in the arena trying things. You you don't often see uh like in the real world what the adoption is looking like or the type of conversations that are happening because we're fucking online all day. But when you look at like some of these stats and metrics, like the Vietnam one, right? What was it, like
Mhm.
70%,
The
75% or
Turkish one is
something?
massive.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
DevCon's going to be in Turkey this year.
Hong Kong doing a bunch of stuff. Like there are so many there are so many huge kind of adoption metrics that countries in Europe and Asia have put out that um, it seems like we may almost think there's less adoption than there really is because it's not being showcased on crypto Twitter,
Yeah, because we're in our echo chambers.
or because like volume isn't showing that there's large inflows, but like the mass adoption isn't going to, I think, be shown to us by large inflows, right? Like that's a different type of mass adoption. That's institutions and banks like deciding now we can onboard our clients into crypto and we can get our own positions. Like mass adoption is hundreds of thousands of people in like fucking Africa now all trading crypto on their phones seamlessly from their bank to whatever exchange they want. Like we're not going to see that because trading $10, $20 worth of crypto at a time isn't putting the metrics up that analysts are looking for to say, "Oh, the bull market has started. Oh, adoption is here."
Hey, volume precedes price. So
Yeah.
one all right. already forgot what I was going to say.
Wanna.
That I know what it was. So there was I retweeted the other day, but Paradigm, like crypto paradigm, like the trader paradigm, not the
Yeah, I
um
know you're talking about.
okay. He posted a video of a guy who like went down into the weeds of like what the next like 10 years will look like in terms of crypto as a collateralized asset and what does that mean for like traditional markets, capital markets, um, lending. And I think he does a really good job of showcasing, like, okay, what does an ETF enable, right? Like, an ETF enables a asset that can be collateralized in the traditional banking world without having to bridge any of the like crypto or web3 or blockchain based elements, right? They take care of the blockchain based elements. You get an ETF that is tied to this spot asset of Bitcoin, but now you can use that asset for collateralization of a ton of things. And right, and that collateralization of a ton of things means that like you get this liquidity movement um, of like traditional US dollars in all these different spaces. And so like, but the ETF manager gets actually control of like the underlying asset, even though the third party or the holder of that ETF, it gets like, you know, the upsides and downsides. But this is why when you see stuff like BlackRock owns all of this, BlackRock owns all of that, it's because technically, as a manager,
They're holding that
sure,
inventory.
yeah, exactly, they're holding all that inventory. So when it comes to like voting on a proxy of like a corporate, you know, like they control all of that. Um, which it's super interesting. And if you look like 5-10 years out and you're like, okay, just okay, Bitcoin and Ethereum is like one thing, but then you get like these large ETF like groups that have, I mean, he doesn't talk about this in the video, but I'm just thinking out loud, like plays into these large like DeFi protocols. It's an interesting future because we don't have anything like that right now. We don't have a large index or ETF crypto bundle that then has this like massive outsized play on the governance of all these different protocols.
How long do you think before we see something like that where, it's taken this long for an Ethereum ETF to even be close enough for people to be like excited for a real reason? Like I remember in like 2018 and stuff when like ETFs were getting thrown around, there wasn't it it wasn't realistic in my opinion to anyone outside of like the far end of the spectrum of like the bulltards. Now that I think we've kind of reached a point of adoption, uh, no pun intended, I guess, but um, that it's very plausible, right? Like you have heads of the big banks who are coming out and talking about Bitcoin in a positive light. You have fund managers, BlackRock, and other large ones coming out and giving Bitcoin praise. And God, how many ETFs in the last year? Like close to 20 now, I think. Like applications have been submitted. It's like 13 just the other week.
Well, if you take that play that crypto paradigm, like the video that he puts on, is that like the major narrative change that we will see once a Bitcoin ETF or Ethereum ETF gets approved is the ESG nature, right? So like obviously there's a massive amount of money that went into ESG based funds, right? So like sustainable funds or companies that to get listed, to get included in these bundles, you had to adhere to certain things, whether your businesses are like eco-friendly in terms of power utilization, like your buildings, or you're reinvesting so much money into a long-term plan to get carbon neutral or whatever, right? Like, so there's this long-term play into being ESG friendly, ESG plus. And if you especially with a lot of the miners moving out of China, I think that like that makes perfect sense. Is that you'll get this narrative. Obviously, Ethereum's already there, right? You get this
Yep.
narrative of these ESG plus assets, which is Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then you haven't seen these outsized returns with these ESG funds, right? But if you add an asset that has at least with it has finite supply, especially with Bitcoin, then you can get some of these. You can put those in some of those bundles where you then start to get the appreciation of a finite supply, especially if we continue to start printing in the next like 2 years again, right? So if we see a downward trajectory of the economy next year, you could start to see printing again. Start to see printing again. Obviously, Bitcoin price will go up, and so then you can get some of these outsized returns by holding BTC in these ESG bundles, which makes perfect sense to me. And usually in the ETF market, it's winner take all, and like so you need to land grab as much as you can in the first like 6 months, because at that point, then when you go to your if you're a retail person or your grandma, mom and pop or whatever, and you go to your portfolio and you're just going to look at like, I want to buy an ETF, like it's going to be like the largest by TVL, and you're 9 out of 10 people are not going to look at number two. They're only going to look at number one, right? They're like, oh, everyone else, wisdom of the herd, everyone else is in this one, so it's going to be a winner take all market.
Yeah. um, why I was kind of asking is, like, so it's taken this long for them to get to the finish line, kind of with just Bitcoin and ETH. And the way I was kind of interpreting what you were saying previously was that, we'll move into this world where there are essentially like an altcoin indexed ETF, right? Like of maybe like the fangs of crypto. And if there's still this uncertainty of whether or not they can classify or I don't know, regulate ETH enough to where they can provide an ETF publicly. What do you think, or how long do you think it will be before something that is more of a basket of these top
Blue chips.
blue chips come through? I think that
I
would be
I
much
I,
harder.
I
Like
could
that's
see
going to be
it.
like a tough, like uphill battle to get that. But maybe I'm wrong.
No, I agree with you, but I could see you get a Bitcoin. Ethereum is going to come 6 months after. If not, you already see people that are retransitioning to a weighted basket, so like a 50-50 Bitcoin ETH, right? So they're already trying to get ahead of that. So yeah, I think Bitcoin January, sometime before the halving, and then Ethereum will be 6 months after that, and then you'll see large
Happening.
inflows, and then I bet I have no idea after that. It could be. It depends on regulatory clarity, but I think that is enough of a catalyst to kind of push the market forward that you could see the resurgence of a DPI, right? Like you could see a resurgence of a DPI that's provided on maybe like a crypto token that is actually an index itself, in which that it's not necessarily doesn't necessarily roll up into a traditional market ETF, but you can buy it on like a Robinhood, right? It's still in its crypto form. And then I could see something like a DPI taking off again, where you have 20 different assets. The simplicity of investing in crypto, I think, will come back then, and you won't have to go into like the weeds. And it's like, what does your crypto portfolio look like? Okay, well, 50% Bitcoin, 25% ETH, 25%
I hate
ETH.
indexes so much.
Well, if you think about simplicity, it's like,
I
okay,
get it.
obviously
I just hate it. It's like
you
such a.
name,
Go ahead. I'll
I was gonna say,
say
yeah,
after.
you name any of the top like 300-400 tokens that are on CoinGecko, and we can nail off if it's good or bad, right? But you can't like like traditional investors can't do that. Institutions might start putting desks to it, but I just don't I don't
Just
think the
short.
average investors, that's why they buy ETFs, is because it's just fundamental investing. You have a weighted portfolio, you know. That's what you do.
I
You do a
guess if
little. Go ahead.
I guess actually like if they're settling in U.S. dollars, then it's not uh it's not as bad, right? Like then there's a chance. I'd have to look at it in in dollars. My problem is that like I compare everything to ETH in that realm, I guess, right? And like indexing for a long period of time versus just having inventory of ETH has shown to be not the best playbook in almost any like long term. We'll say long term being like I don't know 6 months plus. Has there ever been a time that an index of altcoins has outpaced ETH? And I don't know if that would be true.
Because they're too correlated, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You can have a yearn maker, compound index, but they're so correlated. Then like there really is no alpha in being an active manager on those. I could see that changing though, and that's where like I could see like a
yeah, yeah.
resurgence of a lot of these like token sets and valios, and where there's a specific asset and there's an asset manager.
I think it's my like the point of view that I'm coming from that or kind of my like line of thinking and actions that turns me off to it because if I were starting in fiat and I wanted exposure, then it may be a good play just for me to have exposure to the other things happening in the market. If my returns are in USD and I entered with USD, um, but my brain works backwards, works opposite, inverse from that, I guess, where it's like I have ETH, so what am I going to buy or index that will outpace this, and who am I locking this with for X amount of whatever their contract is for. Like, yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
Look, I mean, you can automate a lot of it.
I definitely
You
agree with you. Like, we'll see something like that. Probably be like exactly what you said too, like Maker, Compound, Yearn, like any of these, maybe
It would be just like
synthetic.
DPI, right? It would be
Yeah,
like the
it
ERC
probably
20s
will.
of
It literally probably will be
yeah.
DPI, DPI and the CME. um,
No, I don't think that these are going to get traditional finance approval uh, in the like foreseeable future unless we see like strong regulatory changes.
yeah,
I think it's still going to live as an ERC 20 that is a basket of other ERC 20s, just like DPI is, where it's just like an actual token. I don't think that's going to ever roll up to actually be an ETF. So you'll still have to do it via your Fidelity. Like I could see it being a listed asset in Fidelity Digital Assets, like on Robinhood, on Coinbase, stuff like that. Like you're not gonna see it in your traditional, J.P. Morgan Chase investment portfolio unless they start supporting crypto tokens. But who knows? Maybe we'll get regulatory, clarity, and there'll be we'll see like someone like a Grayscale
it's the
to be
best
one of the
meme.
first ones to come out and do it, right? Because they did a lot of the Z caches and Solana trusts and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I could see them. I could see them being well placed to do something like that if they are allowed to.
love that meme. Regulatory clarity.
Hey man,
uh,
regulatory clarity and election years is the biggest things that kind of spook the market. So,
yeah, for sure. And this one's gonna be interesting. Um,
all right, should we get into some news?
yeah, let's get into some news.
All right. So we talk about this every once in a while. Denkun scheduled by end of the year. I think
Can't wait.
Uniswap V4 is scheduled to come out right after Denkun. So that gives you some, clarity on when that's going to come out. I feel bad for all the people building on Uniswap 3.
It's kind of odd that they dropped V3. Now, like we're not in close proximity, or nor do we chat with them like often. But you would think if you're gonna push like a major update to your protocol, and you're kind of a like backbone that a lot of people build atop of, or a substrate that protocols use, that you would send out some kind of developer update like, hey all, if
I
you're
disagree
building
with you.
right
I think
now.
they have done that.
Do
And
you?
that's why they released all of the V4 stuff 6 months before V4 is actually going to go live. So if you're currently integrating with V3, maybe you pivot, because and that's why instead of doing like how they did from V2 to V3, like in that model, they just dropped V3 and they're like, here it is. And they had their video. And like, then you had the day they launched V3, you could start building and integrating.
Yeah, I guess
They
you're
did it
right.
different
It's
this way.
it's still coming out. It's still got a little bit to come out. All the hype and talk kind of has me thinking it's like about to be here. So yeah, I guess I agree with you on that. It's definitely better to get everyone on board. I guess the thing is like yeah, it just kind of sucks for the developers that already spent the last maybe like a year building on V3 and they're about to release. Now they're like, oh fuck.
Yeah, I mean, if you're scheduling dev cycles, then you schedule based on like kind of what you know, if especially depending on like the size of your dev team and the size of your runway. So I don't know if anyone will pivot or not, but crypto moves so fast that maybe traditional way you run a business you shouldn't do in crypto.
As
But yeah, if I was building
bullish.
something that's going to launch on V3, I think that the pivot to V4 will be incredibly fast and not like the pivot of V2 to V3. Right? Pivot of V2 to V3, a lot of people weren't so keen on it, and so you still see a massive amount of liquidity in V2. I don't think that's going to be the case for here. I think everyone's going to be like, thank God, get me off of V3.
Yeah, I think that the changes to X or V4, whatever you want to refer to it, are definitely enough to, at least on the development side, for people to make the switch. On the user side, I feel like people don't really understand what Uniswap X is and like what intents do. Um,
Yeah, and for clarity for listeners, those are two products. V4 is one product, and X is a completely separate product.
yeah. Um, that's my point, right? Like, so you have this like I don't know, meshing of information on two different products that are coming out. And for users, like they'll probably go with familiarity. So it's like if they're using
Well,
like
they'll never
everyone
see X.
I
X
know
is only for devs.
I know what I'm
Like,
saying is like I'm not talking about between those two. I'm talking about like between going back to Uniswap or continuing to use like swap.defi llama, right? Because
yeah,
users don't understand that they'll be able to get the same type of functionality from V4 as they would from like a traditional aggregator. So there has to be, I think they should focus on uh, kind of explaining what the features are of V4. Because the only people that are kind of excited about V4 Uniswap X is the development community.
yeah. I mean, I actually saw some. I don't know if I made this up or I actually saw this, but I feel like I saw something that a large majority of trades from a like retail user perspective are still going through Uniswap's front end. They're not using like
Really?
an aggregator, which is crazy to me. It's like I haven't
Yeah.
used the Uniswap front end in forever unless I'm depositing liquidity.
I only use it sometimes to wrap and unwrap ETH.
Yeah, yeah, and you can do that in MetaMask now without a fee.
Yeah.
Finally, so
I
like
don't
you don't
use
even need
MetaMask.
MetaMask. I think used to charge a fee for wrapping. Um, but yeah,
I gave up on Little Fox.
oh yeah, that's right. Um, yeah, it's crazy to me people aren't using like swap.defi llama or matcha.
I only use Matcha or swap.defi llama
Same,
if I'm not like doing something natively to a protocol that involves a
same.
swap. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to
I actually haven't
choose
used
one.
matcha since DeFi Llama put out their swaps. I actually solely used DeFi Llama now.
Yeah, there's no swap UX that's good enough to say uh, you feel so good doing the trade on my site that you wouldn't go and compare our prices to someone else's. like, so yeah, I mean, I defer to the best price.
Yeah, it just
Why
makes
don't you talk
sense.
about what are you most excited for with the new Uniswap releases? I know you're hard on for Intense, but what else is coming out with it that you're
Oh,
pretty
I have
excited
no
about?
like opinions on V4 other than some of the hooks will allow us to do better options markets, and that's about the extent that I've looked into that. Um, X though, I think it's going to be super bullish for natives. I mean, it's super bearish for aggregators, I think, and super bullish for native integration at the protocol level or at the project level. So like you're going to start seeing more of like a super app type of thing, right? Whereas like if you need to do a swap, you don't need to leave the site. You can just do it natively. Like on our site right now, we use Socket, where like if you need to do a swap, you can just do it, or you need to do a bridge, you can just do it on our site. I think you're going to see a lot more apps that just plug into Uniswap, and then via API endpoint, you put in like what the asset you want to look for, and that they're going to give you the best price based on the fillers that are providing. Unless there's like some research that comes out that there's preferential treatment, or there's I remember someone put out originally, and then I went into the documentation. I couldn't actually find this myself. That there were like a cabal of fillers that get first right of refusal. So like,
I think I read that somewhere too.
yeah, this is like that. There was like the first, I don't know, 2 seconds or 1 second or 10 milliseconds, whatever it is that there's a preferential treatment. So
Yeah,
like
there's
for
like a
payment for
private
order
pool.
flow, and then after that, it goes out to the general network of fillers.
Yep.
But then when I looked at the documentation, I couldn't find that. So I don't know if it was redacted or if that
I
person just had a bad interpretation or what.
I definitely remember seeing a thread where they were talking about that, or they were pointing out how that there was like essentially like a whitelisted or like dark
Yeah.
pool of fillers that were approved by Uniswap that would get first right. But yeah, I didn't dig into it much. Um, I just kind of I thought it was just gossip and something that was gonna make Hayden fight with people on Twitter for. So I was more waiting for more waiting to see responses to come back to it. Yeah, I should go check.
I kind of related, but not really related, but maybe related. Um, there was an article that was put out about on Blockworks about copycat problem, and the fact that like a lot of public goods generation and public goods creation and like open source nature is left to a lot of like reskins of protocols.
I
And
agree.
so like you build a nice front end, you throw it on a fork, and then you might take more volume than from some of the other groups, right? And I know that Uniswap was was people were pointing their fingers at Uniswap for doing this comparative to like things that CrocSwap has put out and things that CowSwap has put out and things that 1inch has done.
I don't
Um,
give it. I don't care at all. Like you've known me from the beginning. I'm all about the front end being closed source and open source everything else. Like go do your own work. You're like I don't know. I'm all for like sharing code and like that it's free speech. So anyone should be able to look at and reference and learn from code. But in crypto, like providing someone your front end code is like I don't know. Like it is the gateway to not just forking and copying you, but back when we kind of first started in DeFi stuff, that was how you scammed people. Like people just would rip the front ends of the most popular farms. They'd spin up a scam site, and then you have a bunch of people losing money on the fifth kimchi fork. um, so I've always had like a I don't know resistance to open sourcing the front end code. Um,
yeah, but I think what I'm trying to get at is, and this is the approach that we're taking actually, is a change in the licensing structure.
yeah,
So obviously Uniswap does their BSL so that they can entrench themselves over a period of time before they open source the code. And
They did a good job scaring everyone.
yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a threat, right? It's a threat. So um but they definitely had an opportunistic elements in terms of like other groups that were open sourcing the code. And so I feel like other protocols are going to start taking this approach similar to what we're taking, is where for non-commercial use, full ham, right? Like you can use it for whatever. You can straight fork the contracts, or you can you can fork the contracts as long as if the flow is still coming to the base set of contracts, like in Uniswap, if you're still using the Uniswap pool factory and like the swapping fees and like their base infrastructure, then you can do anything else you want with the smart contracts. Obviously, the interfaces are usually open source in terms of integrating. But then if you want to straight fork a protocol for non-commercial use, like you're not capitalizing on anything, you're not making any revenue, um, and you want to use like your own factory in that circumstance, then okay, fine, as long as you're not making any money on it. And I think that's what brought a lot of new developers to build on something like a Uniswap v2, right? The fact that it was fully open source like that, you can tinker with it, you can build your own protocols, you can do whatever with the code base, as long as you're not trying to pull a sushi swap and make money off of it, create any revenue. In the circumstance in which you want to do that and you want to create revenue, then you pay a royalty,
Yeah.
right? And you do that royalty, you pay it on chain, no questions asked. If you don't pay it on chain, then that's when you're kind of opening yourself up to litigation. I think I mean that's the approach that we're taking as a future, as like commercial use. Here are the multi-sigs in which you need to pay a 20% fee on. If there are not going to be stipulations on when that 20% fee is, just keep open communication lines. Like there's no KYC on what you're doing there, for those user groups. But in the event that you don't pay those 20% royalties, then you open yourself up.
Yeah. Yeah, my kind of I'm all for that, right? I guess my stronger view for leaning towards, or I guess being uh favoring more of closed source for front ends comes from the only time I ever got exploited was like 5 years ago, and it was from downloading a bad wallet, like a fake wallet. And it gave me this different insight into like open source software that I didn't have before. I used to be like, everything should be open source. Everyone should have access to everything. It's one of the greatest like learning tools that there is to be able to see like a full code base. But then I realized that, in for the reasons that people want things open source, because we should be able to see the code, people should be able to check over the code before they execute anything or deploy something. There aren't enough people that understand how to look for what shouldn't be there. So even though like all these applications, wallets, and whatnot were open source, there was nobody looking at it. So it wasn't until someone would get hacked that then someone they knew who, had a security background may go look at this code and then go, oh, yeah, this code is bad because da 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 da. So I was like, there seems to be a much thicker safety net or safety blanket when they don't have access to the front end code. And there was a wallet provider I worked with where they open sourced a lot of what they did, but they kept some of their secret sauce closed source that had to do with the way their front end operated. And I think in like their history, they may have had like one close copycat, but it helped them protect, the integrity of their software and like their user base. So there's like I don't know, like a duality to it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in crypto, you need to make sure that the source code of the smart contracts is verified so people can read over the functions. Whether or not that code base can be freely built upon, derivative works can be utilized, stuff like that. So I think we're a maturing industry in that regard, because I tweeted about this the other day, but so JP Morgan has a program called Onyx. And what Onyx is essentially doing is they're trying to bring I think they're calling it institutional DeFi. And so what they have been doing, at least for their initial pilot program, is they forked Uniswap, they forked Aave, they loaded them on Polygon, right? And so now you get these protocols that have spent like, millions of dollars in dev to build these protocols that are getting freely forked by a name like JP Morgan. And then they control who can like use those platforms, right? So it's a hybrid. It's a permissionless blockchain network, but permissioned usage of these forks. So they do on-chain credentials. So like you can only interact with the smart contracts if your wallet holds an NFT, which means you've been KYC'd. And the only assets that can kind of trade with these, like the Uniswap pools, are assets in which that they've essentially, issued on chain. So the example was like Singaporean dollars. SGD is they took Singaporean dollars, they issued them on chain, and then they created these like Uniswap pools where you could only trade with them if you had a KYC wallet. Um, and I definitely see a world where we start to see like large banks taking advantage of, because my original thought was, okay, these banks won't have the expertise to deploy this stuff, and so that they're going to end up hiring the DeFi developer groups to put their own implementation together anyways, right? So like the DeFi developer groups will get some benefit, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. They're just hiring people in the space that can, fork and run these smart contracts and deploy these smart contracts, and not necessarily doing any innovation, just using battle tested smart contracts and then gating and monetizing at the control layer. So DeFi devs need to start paying more attention, I think, to what they're doing, or they're going to get
Vampire attacked by feds.
yeah.
um, yeah, I definitely see a world where at least the first part of that occurs, where we start seeing these, we could just say synthetic assets, right, or approved like whitelisted synthetic assets that are based on whatever regulated native like national currency that the Fed's using or that nation state is using, and then having these like permission KYC pools, uh, almost like in parallel to kind of what like Aave was doing originally with their institutional stuff, but a bit more guarded or gated. Um, I definitely see stuff like that happening. We've had conversations in the past with people where they are questioning around how deposits or withdrawals are restricted, or how do you know who is depositing withdrawing into this. And
Yeah,
um,
there's two, like if you get into like the backwoods or the behind closed doors conversations in the DeFi space, is there's two camps for sure. There's the one camp of like KYC's coming, you need to start preparing for it, and then there's the other camp that like vehemently like opposes this, right? And so like we shouldn't even entertain the idea. We should continue down the legal course of this is permissionless. We can't control who uses the protocol. This is how we're building it, right? When like
I'm with you.
I mean, really, realistically, DeFi devs can put wallet controls in place at the smart contract level, like, but you can. There's two paths that you can take, and I think that a lot of different groups are kind of taking different approaches to that. And there's
Do you
some teams
think
that have
that
like good legal teams, and some teams that don't have good legal teams, and there's some teams that have risk averse legal teams, and there's some that that are the kind of DeFi native or more at least crypto native.
do you feel like hold on one sec. Do you feel like that they will just get kind of replaced, like if the narrative in the traditional finance world is that you have to use these uh, I don't know, approved like applications that have been built in like the essence of Aave, the essence of Maker, um, but they do not. allow you to interact with anyone. They're not, permissionless. They're permissioned. Do you feel like they will just slowly try to start or keep eating like the DeFi pie and pulling into their pool to where all of the retail and normal users feel like that the permissioned ones that they need to KYC for is the one that like the good people use, and the non-permissioned ones is like purely criminal. It's like I think it would be hard for them to push that narrative right now because crypto has bled into retail in a different way than it did the last cycle with kind of with NFTs and the normalization of uh, we'll refer to them all as in-game items, right? Like really all like digital collectibles are Ethereum in-game items. um, so like with the introduction of that, there's this additional layer of kind of understanding of a use case that there wasn't the last time around. So do you kind of see that it will be too difficult to like push a narrative that you have to use the permission KYC stuff, um, or that they'll just like coming swiftly say you can't use anything that's not approved by us. Here's the replacements.
Look, I think it's like 100% up to the amount of money that we put into lobbying, straight up, because like both of them can exist, and it's how the narrative is formed, like you said. Like if the narrative is formed that okay, we can comply, then they're just going to continue to push down that route and force everyone to comply. And sure, if you want to commingle between like with institutional capital, then you need to comply. And it depends on whether or not the we want the future of crypto to be permissionless, or we are like, okay, we'll play by these institutional comply rules, and there's benefits of that. It just depends on do we like the unregulated money casino elements of DeFi and crypto? Do we or do we not? Um,
I think anyone that says that they don't is lying because like the allure outside of controlling, like being the one in control of your money, is that you can outperform pretty much every traditional finance like asset or tool with DeFi in regards to gains and volatility. Um,
I see my personal take on terms of like driving the narrative will be something like a Ukraine, right? Whereas you want to remain you want your to remain like sovereign over your own capital, so over your sovereignty. So like if you need to pick up and leave, like you can't be tied to traditional institutions. And if I'm
yeah,
using a Ukraine institutional account or whatever, and Russia takes them over, and now Russia has control of all these accounts, and I can't get my money out, then I lose. Or if just Ukraine is like, we need to rehypothecate this to pay for a war, then you can't take your capital out, right? Like if you need to pick up and move and get out of the country, and you can't do that, like that's a problem, right? And so by having your own control over your finances is a bigger narrative, I think, than what we need to be pushing in terms of like the outpaced returns and the fluidity of capital and stuff like that.
I want to say it wasn't that too long ago that didn't India like reset their cash supply, wiped like
They
80
they
something
they
percent?
X'd it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So like you have instances like that happen, and like the citizens of a country still don't like adapt or change. And I'm not saying like that it would happen in mass, but although like India is a huge market, you don't see like this um on the ground kind of push to have crypto be like anything more than like what it currently is, I guess. Um,
It depends if things are stable and people are docile, and like how people like if people are controlled in a controlled manner, then yeah, they'll remain in a controlled manner. They'll remain docile. They'll remain compliant. But it's when the shit hits the fan is when like that all goes out the door. So if you remain in a stable environment, then yeah, I could see people and being like, okay, well, I don't, I can comply because these are not issues that I faced within my lifetime. But
That's always the case, right? Like, and that's why history rhymes, because people say, "Oh, that happened, 40 years ago. That like isn't going to happen to me," or "What's happening now isn't the same as what happened before." And it's really just like
until it is,
yeah, they're
yeah.
really just like in the ramp up stage, so they don't really realize it, and then it's too late, and they're like, "Oh shit, it happened again." Um, that's one of the not the um, what happened in India, but just that idea of the government, the boogeyman, being able to seize your funds because of some national emergency or something happening was one of the like leading ideas that kind of drove me into like the Bitcoin rabbit hole when I first got into Bitcoin stuff. It was this like massive distrust for the government and what they may do during a time of war, um, under the guise of security and protection. Um, so
I
yeah,
mean,
kind
it's
of
within our grandparents' lifetime that it happened, right? In the U.S. at least.
100 years isn't a long time.
Yeah, it's like there were seizures. There were seizures of gold in, I don't know, when was that? Like the 40s,
There were seizures of alcohol 100 years
60s.
ago.
Yeah, exactly right. Like, like what's it called? The Overton window. Like the time period in which that something it becomes relatively acceptable, like can swing in any what direction, right? Like
Look at marijuana. Like I remember
you look at
when like
marijuana, you look at like racism, you look at like there's a lot of things that swing in incredibly fast rates based on what happens because people have short-term memories, right? And so like what is acceptable over a given time frame can swing dramatically, and that's why you need to have like structures in place that if this were to happen, that I can still control my finances. And so I think that's the narrative that needs to be pushed more than the unregulated behavior of people losing money on scams or poor investment decisions. And it needs to be. It's not that the SEC should or regulatory bodies like the SEC should control and and police what I can do with my money. You should be able to freely do with your money what you want. You can do it with your own person,
it's a
right?
hard narrative to convince people that aren't looking for like an alternative on or that aren't being affected. Like I remember when I used to talk to people about why I was so like interested in Bitcoin, and it made me like 100% sound like a tinfoil hat person, because as soon as you start talking about um, any topic that has to do with like mistrust of government on a large scale, um, people immediately like raise an eyebrow, and especially when it has to do with money, they're like, "Oh, you're gonna fade the dollar." Like it's just like it doesn't matter how much you talk about inflation to them or talk about like the dollar being backed on good faith and trust. Like none of that like matters to anyone. You can bring up what's happened in other countries with their monetary systems, and because it's never like happened to them or they haven't experienced it, the worry isn't something that they will entertain their minds with. Like, why would I worry about that? Like, my bank's fine, and like that what you're describing has never happened in my lifetime. Um,
I will say like nonpartisan in a nonpartisan way that Trump and his like fake news narrative really caused people to think about the things that they're reading for better or for worse. Obviously, conspiracy groups have grown significantly, for good or for bad. And like, I was actually so I'm always interested in like these alternative sources of data, and I was just looking at like the top book sales at Amazon, and I was looking at like what just like obviously you'll get like the new whatever the new Game of Thrones fantasy novel is, and whatever self help book it is. But I was going through like the first, I don't know, 50 pages, and there is a significant amount of untrust of government, books that are starting to hit there, especially like Red Wave, especially with the election year coming out, like Republican type books. So I definitely see, like, again, Overton window type stuff of mistrust of the government starting to be in a completely different place than it was even like during the Brock's time, like way different than where it was during Brock's time.
Dude, I mean, just over the last 5 years, on it, both sides of the like U.S. political spectrum, the amount of scandals,
Whiplash,
yeah,
like
like all sorts of stuff on each side, um, I feel like I've been at like an all-time high, and because of the way that social media and content distribution works now, everyone is getting it served to them at like rapid speed. So whether it's bad stuff about Donald Trump, about Vivek, it's one of them schooling
Elon
other
Musk
people,
and, and
or
and putting all of the Twitter files.
yeah, the Twitter stuff, like, the Biden stuff between both of them. Like, you have so much shit that floods in from both sides that it's hard to uh, it's hard to look at, like, for I guess for the people that believe in there being a two-party system, it's hard to look at either side with through the lens of trust when there's so much scandal that's being put right in front of everyone. So I think it may be one of the first times in a while that there is like massive distrust on each side, and they feel like they have to kind of like really pick through the data and what's being served to them because of all of the quote unquote misinformation and narratives that are being fed to people.
I think it's a great point to end on today. We didn't really even go through good. This is a it was a good show today. We didn't even really cover current events.
Yeah, the only thing that I want to touch on real quick before we wrap up is I put out a tweet earlier today. um, we are doing some demos of Premia Blue, the new options exchange that we're going to launch very, very soon. Um, if you are a close friend and you would like a early demo, we're doing them tomorrow and on the 8th. Shoot me a DM or shoot Premia Finance on Twitter a DM, so we can set up a time and get you accounted for. But we're super excited about it. Been working hard on it for the last, what, year, and
Two
I feel
years.
like almost 2 years now. I was going
Two
to say
years in
year and
November.
8 months. Yeah. Oh, wow. November. All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of the magnus opus. We're really excited to share it with everyone. If you have not already shot me a DM, shoot me a DM. We'll schedule a time. That's all I got. DK, anything from you before we close this up?
No, appreciate the time. I won't be here tomorrow. I'll leave it to Cozy if we're gonna do a show tomorrow or not. But and we will probably be traveling on Monday and Tuesday of next week. But other than that, we should be here Thursday, Friday.
Yep. I'm gonna try and get something going tomorrow. Monday, Tuesday, we'll probably be out though for travel. We should try to do something while we're in
There,
permissionless. They usually have those,
booths.
podcast setup
Yeah,
booths. We could see how we could possibly book a time. Maybe get some people who are live there to come sit down and chat.
awesome.
That'd be dope. All right, guys, it's been fun. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow at 11 a.m. EST.
Adios.